Welcome again to Joe Stunner Boxing. I hope you're all doing great. Guy called John, one of my subscribers, in the comments section of my previous video about Dennis Andrews, he asked if I could do a video about Alan Minter. And you know, ask and it shall be given. So here's a video about Alan Minter. Of course, you probably know Alan Minter as a former undisputed middleweight champ of the world. And as John said in his comment, Alan went from a domestic level fighter with very, very vulnerable skin. He was always bleeding, always getting cuts, to the undisputed champ. I mean, it's a hell of an achievement. So yeah, I mean, Alan finished his career actually. Well, it started in 1972 and it finished in 1981. So he had, you know, 9-year pro career. He achieved an awful lot. British champ, won a Lonsdale belt outright. And probably would have reigned longer as world middleweight champ had it not been for a certain marvellous Marvin Hagler, but we'll get to that later. But he finished his career with 39 wins, 23 KOs, 9 defeats, and 8 of the defeats were by stoppage, almost always on cuts. I mean, he did get knocked out a couple of times, but it doesn't really tell the story. I mean, sometimes records can be a little bit deceptive. But before his pro career, he picked up a bronze medal in the 1972 Munich Olympics. Born in 1951, Alan passed away in 2020, he was age 69. So he turned pro in 1972, yep, just after the Olympics, in October, I think it was, back end of October. And he went on a winning streak, fighting, you know, domestic level guys, no real killers, but what do you expect? He did beat a guy called Pat Dwyer, who was a very, very good domestic level fighter. He sticks in my mind. And is it? Am I thinking right? Was it Pat Dwyer who fought? Yeah, Brendan Ingle. I think he fought Pat Dwyer, if I remember rightly. I could have that wrong. I'm sure he fought Brendan Ingle. I'll have to check. Anyway, I'm digressing. So Alan went on this unbeaten run until in 1973, and they used to fight an awful lot in those days. I mean, every month, you know. He was undefeated until he ran into a guy called Don McMillan. And McMillan was a journeyman, but, you know, a tough guy. And again, it was the cuts. He had a cut over the eye, over the right eye, and it was an 8-rounder, and Alan got stopped in the final round, and he'd had McMillan on the floor, I think, 3 times. So it was in those days there was none of this, well, we'll stop it and we'll go to the cards. No. You got cut, and it didn't matter if it was a headbutt. If you got cut, that's your lot. If it's too bad for you to continue, you get taken out. And Harry Gibbs, who was a ref, stopped Alan in the 8th and final round. Oh, you can't have been happy about that. Jesus Christ! I mean, he'd floored the guy 3 times, and he was on and winning. He was undefeated at the time. And then 3 fights later, I think it was. Same again. All these fights are in Britain, by the way. A lot of them were at the Royal Albert Hall and the York Hall and the old Wembley Empire Pool. But against the Royal Albert Hall, he then got stopped on cuts in 3 rounds by Jan Magdiarez, I think the guy's name was. And that was in the 3rd round. That was an 8-rounder as well. And then they had a rematch, and guess what happened? Magdiarez, I'm probably mispronouncing the name, again at the Royal Albert Hall, stopped Alan in 6. Well, Alan actually retired after 6 rounds. That was another 8-rounder because of cuts. So he's got 3 defeats on his record in his last 5 fights, Alan, and they're all on cuts. And he was winning all 3 of them. So immediately the knock against him, as it was with Henry Cooper, was, you know, cuts very, very easily. That's going to stop him from going to world level, or maybe even European level. In fact, it might, you know, mean he won't fulfil his potential as a fighter because he just got cut all the time. He then had another stoppage defeat on cuts to a guy called Ricky Ortiz. That was in the 2nd round. So by this time, many fighters would have lost heart. They would have said, I can't deal with this. You know, I'm fighting, I'm leading in my fights, and I'm getting stopped on cuts. You know, where am I going with this? And then, guess who he fought? Jan Magdiarez again. And that was a no contest. So Mr. Magdiarez, who, by the way, was based in Britain, Magdiarez, he was becoming the bane of Alan's life. Alan couldn't get over the finishing line with him. 3 fights, 2 defeats, and 1 no contest. So it's by this point, and this was 1974, so it's two years roughly after his after he's turned pro. He's not having any luck, and his career is really stagnating. He's got 3 cut-eye defeats on his record, and no contest. You know, where am I going with this? But he persevered, as all terrific fighters do, or all real fighting men do, you should say. And then finally, after stringing together 5 wins against domestic level fighters, I think he had a couple of trips to Germany or maybe even Belgium. I could have that wrong. But most of the time he was still fighting in London, in England. Finally he gets a shot at the British Boxing Border Control middleweight title, the old Lonsdale belt, and he wins it. He beats none other than Kevin Finnegan over 15 rounds, the old 15 rounders. And it was a very close fight. Sid Nathan, I think, gave it to Alan by about 1 round, I think it was. It used to be the half-point scoring system, not the 10-point must. But it was over 15 rounds. And that was at the Empire Pool, the old Empire Pool, Wembley. And then Alan carried on again. He carried on, he defended his title, knocked out Billy Knight in 2 rounds. But by this point we're up to 1976. And he won the Lonsdale belt outright against none other than his old foe Kevin Finnegan. And again, that was another points win over 15 rounds. And for some reason, his skin wasn't giving him too many problems. He was still cutting, but not to the point where the fights had to be stopped, which was good. Alan then carried on. They started to bring a few imports over. Sugar Ray Seals, who at the time I think was 31-2-1. I think I read that on BoxRec when I was looking at his. Yeah, 31-2-1. Sugar Ray Seals was a decent fighter. Never really achieved much, but actually he had a detached retina and went blind in one eye. Sugar Ray Seals. Alan stopped him in 5 rounds in 76. He then went over to Italy and fought Germano Valsecchi. Stopped him in 5 rounds. So he's now he's by this point, by the way, but with the second victory over Finnegan, he'd won the Lonsdale belt outright, and he's now got the EBU title against Valsecchi over in Italy. And to go to Italy in those days and score a win, I mean, you had to knock them out because you probably weren't getting a decision. You know, it was tough. Yeah, home cooking and all that. But then, guess what happened? He fought Ronnie Harris, who was a very good fighter, actually undefeated when he fought Alan. And that was at Royal Albert Hall. And guess what happened? Alan got stopped on cuts in 8 rounds in a 10-rounder. Sid Nathan, he must have been sick to death of seeing Sid Nathan, because Sid, I think, that was the referee in a few of the fights where Alan got stopped on cuts. But Alan came back with a decent win. It was against Emil Griffith. That was a 10-round points decision, and Griffith was way past his best. Way past. This was 1977, so Griffith had seen far better days, was basically picking up paychecks. But it's an okay name to have on your record, and of course, 10 rounds with Emil Griffith, you're going to learn something, aren't you, even if it is an old Emil Griffith. Unfortunately, he went back over to Italy to fight Gratian Tona for his EBU title, and got stopped in 8 rounds in a 15-rounder. These were still 15-rounders in those days. We're up to 1977 now. So, yeah, 15 rounds, stopped in 8, excuse me, and it was. Guess what? It was a cut. But this one was a little bit different. It wasn't on the eye, it was on the forehead. It was a big gash on the forehead. Referee took a look at it. No, that's your lot. And Alan had lost his EBU title, which was a shame. So he came back. He's still British champ. He came back. He fought his old foe, Kevin Finnegan. Beat him again over 15 rounds. All 3 of the fights with Finnegan were 15-round decisions. Finnegan must have been sick of the sight of seeing Alan, because 15 rounders, 45 rounds of boxing against someone, 3 fights, and you haven't won any of them. But don't get me wrong, Kevin Finnegan was a very, very good fighter. In fact, Kevin Finnegan, people forget this, he fought Marvin Hagler twice, back to back, over in Boston, and he got stopped in, I think he got stopped the first time 7 rounds, and then he retired in 6 and got stopped in 7 the second fight, something like that. But he had back-to-back fights with Marvin Hagler, Kevin Finnegan. He was another good, tough British fighter, very good fighter. And to beat him 3 times, to outbox him 3 times, it's a great achievement by Alan. So he's still picking up wins as the British champ. He's definitely dominating at a British level. And then he goes back over to to Italy again and fights Angelo Jacopucci, Angelo Jacopucci, who at the time was 33 wins, 2 defeats, good record, and he wants that. Alan wants that belt back, and this is for the vacant title, the EBU title, and Alan stopped Jacopucci in 12 rounds of a 15 rounder. But there is actually a very sad aside to this, very sad aside, because Jacopucci died of injuries sustained in that fight, and in fact, the referee, I believe, was found guilty of manslaughter because he didn't stop the fight soon enough. That's a tale for you. Yeah, very, very sad. But these things happen in our sport, don't they? I mean, people get killed. Don't get me wrong, I'm not going to sugarcoat it, but at the same time, I'm not going to, diminish the importance of it. I mean, that would have finished a lot of fighters. In my lifetime, I've seen several fighters who've killed people and just couldn't carry on afterwards. It haunts them. But Alan did carry on. So after that very tragic event, he fought Gratian Tonner again. This time at the Empire Pool in Wembley, and Tonner retired after 6 rounds. Again, that was for the EBU title. And then Alan kept on winning. He kept on picking up wins. Almost all of them were in fact, I think they were all from here on in. They were all in Britain, in London. But then he gets a world title chance. I think it was Mickey Duff at the time, because in those days it would have been Duff, Barrett, Jarvis Astaire. Yeah. He gets a chance in America as an unfancied cherry-picked opponent against Vito Antuofermo, who was the undisputed world champion. Now, when I say undisputed, in those days it was WBC and WBA, and that's your lot. No IBF, no WBO, 2 belts, but you're still undisputed. And Vito Antuofermo held them both. And in fact, Antuofermo was coming off a draw with Marvin Hagler. It was a controversial draw, but nevertheless, it's a draw with Hagler. In fact, they'd fight again further down the line when Hagler had the belts, and Hagler would stop Antuofermo. I think he retired after 4 rounds, if our memory serves. But anyway, Alan went over, Caesar's Palace, Las Vegas, the big stage, his big chance, and he somehow, over 15 rounds, managed to win a split decision. I remember watching that fight when I was a kid, and I remember they were reading the scorecards out, and then you can see Alan's face. He's like this, okay, one goes one way, one goes the other. Have I got it? Have I got it? Have I got it? And then when they said Alan Minter wins, it was 144, 141, something like that. Don't forget, this was a 10-point must system. This was over 15. Yep, he then goes mental. I've won. I am the undisputed middleweight champion of the world. I mean, a fantastic moment for a guy who came through lots of adversity, lots of tragedy. And there he is, top of the world. Well, he fought Antuofermo again, this time in Wembley at the old Empire Pool. And Antuofermo retired after 8 rounds. This time it was Antuofermo who had cuts around the eyes. For once, Alan's skin held up. I don't think he was cutting that fight. He might have been. But Antuofermo was the one who retired after 8 rounds. And that was the only successful defence that Alan Minter made of those belts. Because the following fight on the 27th of September 1980 was against somebody called Marvus Marvelin Hagler, who came to Britain, and he didn't half look the part. I mean, the moment you saw him, you thought, this guy's a hard bastard, and he was, wasn't he? And of course, I think some of you probably already know what happened. It was pure one-way traffic. Marvin just beat the living crap out of Alan. It ended in 3 rounds. There was facial damage around the eyes, all over the place. Alan's face was a mask of blood. He couldn't get out of the way of the punches. Hagler was just too good in every single department. But what followed was an absolute disgrace. There was a sort of riot, if you like, mini riot, if you like. Bottles coming in, pints of beer coming in. Hagler was protected by his handlers in the middle of the ring. They jumped on top of him to protect him. There was a lot of racism, a lot of serious racism around in those days. I remember the Mark Kaler fight when Mark fought Errol Christie. and there were big divisions. I think the NF and all those other scumbags got in touch with, stuck their oar in and tried to pretend that they had something to do with boxing. They didn't. They didn't like Errol at all. Well, it was pretty much the same here. There was a lot of racism, a lot of racial divides in those days, and unfortunately, don't blame Alan at all, but the thugs got the better of it, and Marvin left. He didn't even have a chance to be presented with the belt. Yeah, he left the ring, being protected by his handlers. I mean, a great fighter like Marvin Hagler deserves so much more. But of course, there's a little caveat to that as well, because when Marvin lost to Sugar Ray Leonard, he lost a split decision, and one of the judges was due to be, I want to say, Harry Gibbs. And Marvin said, "I'm not having any English people judging my fights, not since I went over to England and beat Hagler. The treatment I got over there, I'm not having it." So he picked someone else who scored it for Leonard, and in fact Harry Gibbs, if it was Harry Gibbs, I think it was, said, "I scored it for Marvin." So had he let Harry Gibbs judge the fight with Leonard, he would have retained his belt, but didn't. But anyway, that's just a little aside. Marvin was the champ. Alan had lost his belts, and when I say lost them, I mean he really lost them. But Alan came back. He only had one more win in his career, and that was against Ernie Singletary, who at the time was 24 wins and 1 defeat. Alan was looking to come back into world contention. That was at Wembley as well, as Wembley Arena actually. 10 round points win. He then went back over to America and Caesar's Palace and lost a split decision to Mustafa Hamsho, and he was actually favourite to beat Hamsho. And Hamsho was rough and tough, but you thought Alan would probably be able to outbox him, but he couldn't. This was in 1981, the year after he lost to Hagler. So he came back to England and had an EBU middleweight title fight with Tony Simpson, who at the time was 42 wins, 3 defeats and 1 draw. And Simpson from Leicester was a rough and tough guy, would go on to challenge for world titles at middleweight and light heavyweight on 3 occasions. And he knocked Alan out in 3 rounds. Caught him, very rough and tumble, bit of a caveman, Tony Simpson. He had some skill, but he was a rough, tough, physically strong guy. I saw him fight actually at the Royal Albert Hall against Brian Anderson. Big, strong guy. Powerful middleweight, but way too small for light heavy when he fought Dennis Andrews for the light heavy WBC light heavy title. Dennis chewed him up, but at middleweight he was physically strong and a force. And that was a 3-round defeat to Simpson for Alan, and he retired after that. And that was on the 15th of September 1981. So that was the career of Alan Minter. Did some commentary, did the dinner circuit, you know, the speeches and all that, little talks. Had a great career. British Lonsdale belt winner, EBU champ twice I think, and undisputed middleweight title. Not bad, is it? Not bad for a career. It's only 9 years long. And in the old days, again, it was harder in the old days. 15 rounders, you get cut, you get stopped. None of this going to the cards. If you got head-butted, tough, you're still a cut. Yeah. So that's Alan Minter. I hope you liked this video. If you did, hit the like button. Or subscribe to the channel if you're new, and leave some comments if you've got any thoughts about Alan and his career, and yeah, I'll answer them. Thanks for your time as always, and we'll speak again soon. Until then, take care of yourselves. Bye for now.